and we still have to allow time for David David's final remarks. I will take two short questions from the audience. One from you, Daniela, the other one from Guillaume. Uh,
Okay. Hello, David. My name is Daniela, and I would like to ask you if the economic development in China and this new consuming market and growing market, as well as an urbanization of the population, won't that force a political reform? Won't it make it more natural to happen?
so first one, Guillaume at our backbencher.
My question concerns a sort of multi-level challenges, multi-level transition in China, not only internally in terms of social and economic transition, but also externally in the sense that China is also undergoing transition of global power in the system, the global system of power. Then my question is how this complication, this complicated multi-level transition, will affect the major partners of China, like its neighbors in Asia, and also in Latin America, and especially in the case of Brazil.
Thank you. So now final remarks, David. I think you need the mic.
Okay, I'm not entirely sure I understood your question, but how will the leadership transition affect China's relations with other external actors? No.
The transition of global power,
Uh-huh.
global system of power, affects the leadership transition, and what will become of that?
The trend.
How it's going to affect major parts of China like Brazil.
The transition of global power, how will it affect China's relations with other significant actors? Well, first you have to tell me what the transition of global power is that you see taking place.
I think that you mentioned that China is undergoing a transition from a developed country
Right.
to a major power and possibly as a dominant power. So this difference,
Yeah.
we could think of the transition of power in the early 19th century between the U.S. and the British Empire that took 50 years.
Well, there's probably no larger, the only question that's larger than China's future is the future of the world and the trajectory of international relations, which is what you're asking about. I mean, we are in a transitory period, to be sure. Globalization started, well, the first thing that started the transition was the end of the Cold War and the collapse of the Soviet Union, which was followed by what has been called a unipolar moment for the United States. The unipolar moment is over. The United States is now, I would argue, still the world's only superpower. No other country in the world comes close to the United States. And I say that not just as an American, including China. That's the whole argument of my new book, is that China remains a long way behind the United States in every category: culture, diplomacy, economics, security, global governance. So I don't myself see China as a major world power. So that's one premise that a lot of people have, and I think maybe you have. I don't share it. I don't think China's there yet. I think China has a long way to go, and many, many impediments domestically and externally before they really are a true global power. That's why I call them a partial power in my book. Anyway, they are clearly, their rise is another major feature. End of the Cold War, rise of China, and globalization, and the pluralization of international relations, which means what the Chinese call multipolarism. The rise of countries like Brazil and India. I'm not sure, frankly, that the rise of South Africa is a significant development in world affairs. And Vladimir Putin may not agree with me, but the decline of Russia ever since the implosion of the Soviet Union is also significant. So we're living in a world that's transitory, no doubt about it. The United States is also, one can argue, in relative decline in recent years. So where does China fit into that? It's trying its best, I think, to try and build itself during this period. You know, I don't see China really integrating very easily into the international order. They are kind of formally in the international order, but I don't myself see them normatively in the international order yet. They're still very ambivalent about the, certainly they're ambivalent about the, what's known as the liberal order, the post-war liberal order. So in situations like that, the Chinese are having difficulties with the Americans, but as I predicted, or as I said, political scientists or anybody who studies history can predict that. Rising powers are going to challenge established powers. And the only case in history in which a rising power did not clash with a established power resulting in war was exactly the case you mentioned, the United States and Britain at the end of the 19th century when Britain decided to forego its interests in this hemisphere, right here in South America. And the Americans sort of took over their sphere of influence. If the British had not done that, historians argue that in fact the United States and Britain could have been on a collision course. So the fact that the United States is a Pacific power and is not about to do for China what Britain did for the United States at the end of the 19th century argues that there's going to be increased conflict between the United States and China. In other words, the Americans are not about to just pack up and go home and say, sorry, the Pacific Ocean is yours. We're not going to do that. Nor, more importantly, do any Asian countries want us to do that, want us Americans to do that. The pivot is not an invention by the United States or the Obama administration. The pivot is a result of many Asian countries coming to Washington saying they were worried about China's assertiveness and asking the United States to increase its presence, military presence, diplomatic presence, cultural presence, and economic presence through TPP in Asia. So when I look out on the horizon in world affairs, I think that the centerpiece of the world affairs is in Asia. That's clear. It has the greatest concentration of resources, military assets today, and geostrategic interactions. But it's a very unstable order. The instabilities between China and Japan, between the United States and China, between China and Vietnam, between China and other ASEAN countries, between China and India. In other words, China is the problem. All right? China is at the center of all the frictions in Asia, the way I look at it. Now, China doesn't have to be at the center of all the frictions in Asia. They could be taking a different kind of path with each of these countries to ameliorate the frictions. But so far, they're not. And I agree with Ambassador Amaral and Ambassador Hugani that the new Xi Jinping government is probably going to be more hard line, more assertive vis-a-vis its neighbors and against the United States. So frankly, if I look out on the horizon, I can't say I'm really optimistic. I am concerned about clashes between China and these other nations. So what's it mean for China and Brazil? Well, I don't know. The Chinese have a saying, well, 不要干涉你的内政. I don't want to interfere in your internal affairs. So I'll leave it to Brazil and China. An American should not tell Brazilians how to manage relations with China. The only thing I would say is if you don't understand China, you won't be able to manage relations with China. If this country does not invest lots of money into a sustained program of China expertise in its universities, in its think tanks, in the government, not just in the Itamaraty, all ministries, in the intelligence services, and in the commercial world, and in foundations. If you don't do this over a sustained period of time for 10 years, starting now, you're going to find yourselves having difficulties with the Chinese. So the one piece of advice I would share is to invest in what's known as capacity building. You need to build up your China capacity quickly in this country. And that's not, it's not that difficult to do, and it involves different elements we could talk about another time. But I think, it's already begun. It has begun, actually, under Ambassador Huganese period. He has helped work on the 2020 action plan, the 10-year plan. There is some strategic thinking going on here now that I did not see going on here 5 years ago. 5 years ago, my sense was that Brazil was kind of at sea about China, didn't really know what it was. Now I think there's an increasing realization about the importance of China and the need to understand it and interact with it. And there's all these dialogue groups and mechanisms and so on. That's all very positive. So even though I said I won't interfere in your internal affairs, I would actually like to compliment the Brazilian government and the commercial community on how far in a short period of time, in 5 years, you have moved. That's really good. So if you can continue that over the next 5 years or the next 10 years, you'll be all right in dealing with the Chinese. But if you don't, I can tell you, if you don't understand how China works, to the extent that any of us do, it's to one's disadvantage. So one needs to do their best to try and understand it. So I don't know, that's your response. My goodness, your question had to do, Daniela?
If you want to repeat the question.
Well, I think I got it. Will urbanization and consumer society force political reform?
Yes, I mean, if you have a growing economic situation in China, if you have a new intent of having a larger and more robust consumer market, wouldn't that be sort of way, perestroika, glasnost in a Chinese version? Wouldn't that happen? Forced to happen, I mean.
Well, not directly. I mean, there's a lot of social science research that's been done on this linkage between economic modernization and political pluralization across the world. And in fact, it's come to a pretty clear conclusion that economic modernization has led to political pluralization and in many cases democracy across the world. That has happened throughout this hemisphere in the last 20 years, right? It's happened throughout East Asia, pretty much. We still have North Korea, China, and Vietnam as single-party states, but the rest of the East Asian or Asian region is now basically multi-party systems. The military has gone back to the barracks in both Latin America and in Asia, and is not involved in politics. And we've seen with the Arab Spring, actually the Arab Spring didn't take place because of economic modernization. It took place out of frustrations born by economic inequalities. But anyway, the point is, you're right, I guess. Social science research would suggest that this will come to China. But it's not just consumer society and urbanization. It's a middle class, that begins to demand more than an increased salary and consumer durable goods. They want better education, they want better environment, they want better health care. It's what we call public goods. They want better local governance, they don't want corruption, and they begin to place demands on their states. So that's a pattern that has happened. And the question is how you place demands. Are there NGOs? Are there what we call intermediary channels through which society can place demands on a state? And then how does the state respond to the demand? Well, in a country like China, there are no intermediary channels, or there are very few. NGOs are basically gongos, we call them, government organized NGOs. They're not autonomous NGOs.
We have the similar thing.
You have it
similar
here?
thing here.
Not the Cardoso Foundation, no.
We're trying to do, I mean,
So these demands are already being made by local populations in China, and the state has not very effectively responded. So I think we're all three in agreement that social inequality and demands by the population are increasingly a pressure on the Chinese government. And as Ambassador Huguenot's final comments indicated, it's become an impediment to economic reform. I agree with you. At the end of the day, political reform is necessary. And it's not going to come from the top down. This is not, I don't think, the kind of leadership as we had in Taiwan in the 80s or and other authoritarian governments that decided that it's in their best interest to liberalize. These guys, I don't think they quite believe that. So it's going to have to come from the bottom up, or maybe from the party out. There are people in the party, as I say, who are interested in some of these political reforms, but right now they're blocked by conservative elder people. So I think you're right, in essence. Over time, the process you described is going to produce pressures. I'm not going to say it's going to produce a democratic outcome. I don't think so. I agree with Ambassador Amaral. We're not going to see democracy with Chinese characteristics, and maybe, well, we will see democracy with Chinese characteristics. They already say they're a democracy, sorry. They already claim to be a democracy with Chinese characteristics. But it's going to be the most important thing to watch. Financial sector liberalization, HUCOs, all these other SOE reform, all these other areas, those are important. But the big issue is the relationship between politics and economics, I think. So, good question. Thank you.
So that's the end of a extremely rich and comprehensive conversation. I hope this is the first of a series of meetings. So you have to make a commitment here that
Okay.
we'll be back as soon as we call you, right?
Will do.
Okay.
I promise.
So that's a deal.
All right.
Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Thank you.